episode of In Depth with Deon. Today we're diving into how Oklahoma voters are shaping change locally and what that means for regional movements on a national scale. But first, the rundown. In local Tulsa news, artist O'Malley B has dropped a new album, Live More. Make sure you go check it out because everybody's talking about it. In state news, an open records request filed by Fox 25's Wendy Suarez has found that the Heritage Foundation, which is behind Project 2025, has overwhelming influence over the State Department of Education and Ryan Walters here in Oklahoma. And in national news, there have been several reported incidents of hateful acts directed at marginalized groups across the country since Donald Trump's re-election victory on the 5th of November. And those are some of the headlines. This is In Depth with Deon. I'm your host, Deon Osborne, recording from Tulsa's historic Greenwood District. For today's main story, we're exploring why regional movements like those in Oklahoma can be key to national change. So, two questions I have for you. Looking at Oklahoma after the election results, two things that stood out. How did Oklahoma vote for Trump in all 77 counties 3 times? While electing Tulsa's first black mayor, Monroe Nichols, a Democrat, into office, right? Second question, why is Oklahoma's voter turnout so low? We are 50th in the nation. Joining me to help answer these questions is Deputy Director of the Terence Crutcher Foundation, Sheyda Brown. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you for having me, Deon. This is amazing and such an important topic to start with.
Look, I'm just grateful to have you on the show. You are so impactful on the grassroots level for what you do, but also you've recently released an op-ed that really kind of speaks to the heart of this question, and also a report that the foundation recently released about voter turnout in Oklahoma. So I want to get into that. I want to break this down with you, but I guess to start off with, what was your initial reaction on Election Day night?
Yeah. Let's get into it. Man, it was tough. I have to say it wasn't as tough as 2016. Like, I feel like I was kind of preparing myself, knowing what I know about Oklahoma, like knowing what I know about, our voter turnout realities. Like, I have to admit, I'm kind of a worst case scenario person. So I was like preparing myself. In 2016, I came in hot with like hope and belief, for that national election. And then I remember I couldn't even get out of bed the next day. So I was like ready. I was like, okay, I'm not doing that again. I did have a lot of hope for Tulsa. I really did believe that we could do something transformative. And I think I believed that because of what we've seen in the past, 8 years since this movement that I feel like you're a part of, that I'm a part of, has been growing ever since, Terence was unfortunately killed. Like, it has instilled a different level of hope for our local work in Tulsa and Oklahoma. But yeah, nationally, I was nervous. I was really preparing myself for whatever news was going to come. And I think election night, election next day, when we did see that victory here in Tulsa, not only was I able to get out of bed, but honestly, I've been okay. Like, I've been okay because I feel like it tells such an important national story. Like, to be the bright spot, for Tulsa to be the bright spot, to have a Good Morning America piece about the first black mayor. And I just want to say, not just the first black mayor, he was the non-FOP endorsed candidate. And for maybe people listening who doesn't know what that means, like, the Fraternal Order of Police does endorsements on mayor, on city councilors. And just thinking about the work we do at the Crutcher Foundation, those endorsements a lot of times kind of limit what kinds of progress we can have in a city to protect people from like police brutality and police violence. And this was a candidate that was not FOP endorsed. He was not a front runner. People did not believe he had a chance. We surprised everyone. I don't think I was surprised because I know the building work we've done the last 8 years to try to get people more engaged, more aligned on issues, and knocking doors, which is really the key. So in some ways, not surprised about the national results. and not surprised about the local results, because I feel like I've been a part of that, you know, sort of 8-year process of trying to build a movement here that is finally like, I feel like other people are finally catching up to.
Well, definitely the national media is finally catching up to it, right? I mean, you look at a state like Oklahoma that is, in every sense of the word, considered a flyover state. You know, when it comes to the national issues on abortion and reproductive access, when it comes to, you know, democracies and attacks on democracies, we are at the front lines. You know, police brutality, police violence. We're at the front lines of so many national issues that media just overlooks us, right? Until we do something that they can't overlook. In your op-ed that the Black Wall Street Times published, you wrote, "Why the nation can't afford to ignore Oklahoma." I want to read one quote from you. "The election of Tulsa's first Black mayor is proof that Oklahoma is not a lost cause. Despite being a state where all 77 counties went for Trump, there is a growing democracy-minded voter base here." Talk about that.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen in Oklahoma, we've seen like glimmers of like democratic progress. We've seen things pass at a state level that you wouldn't have expected. For example, Medicaid expansion was a 10-year kind of organized fight to get that passed, and it was a successful like ballot measure. Another example, medical marijuana. Like, who would look at a state like Oklahoma and think that medical marijuana could pass at a state level? And then we have examples like the teacher walkout in 2018.
Yeah.
You know, we were like one of the first states to kind of have that huge, I think it was like 50,000 people were at the Capitol over that period of time. And after Oklahoma had their walkout, other states, like 12 other states, kind of followed suit, and it became a national trend. So I think we've seen these moments where Oklahoma can be an example and kind of be unexpected, that people weren't, you know, people wouldn't look at us and believe that some of these things can pass. Criminal justice reforms that passed. We had one of the largest state, I'm trying to think of that word, where Kevin Stitt, not expungements, but
commutations.
Commutation. We had one of the largest commutations in our nation's history.
Mass commutations.
Yeah. And so, you know, I think, I think the reason people, you know, don't see and believe in Oklahoma and see it as a not a worthy investment. I mean, I've worked in philanthropy. I've heard funders straight up say, you know, it's not a valuable investment. Wow. I would rather put my money in a swing state or in a growing purple state than, you know, put it here where we might, you know, lose, or too frequently we lose. And I think the reason people believe we can't win or believe we're not worthy of investment is really because structurally our politics aren't working for people. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't have open primaries. We have a single majority that is in charge of our entire, you know, kind of legislative body, runs our highest levels of office at our state level. And we, for too long, I think, have perpetuated the message to voters that, like, your vote in Oklahoma does not matter. If you are not a Republican, because you have to be a Republican to vote in Republican primaries. We don't have open primaries. So often people are not even in the like political conversation. Their vote isn't even it's not even like being able to be received right now, because we straight up close the opportunity for people to have a voice in who is running. So just as an example, if we hear so much about Ryan Walters, and I think so much about our state education, public education system. In 2026, we will have a new potential for a new state board of education superintendent. When I posted on social media about what people think, how should we prepare for 2026, overwhelmingly you heard people say, change your party to Republican, or else you won't even get to have a say in who that position is, because it's most often going to be decided at the primary level. Like, that first primary is going to decide who wins in that position. And so what does that say to like people who have a different point of view, who, aren't aligned with a certain party? We have 500,000 independents registered in this state that don't get to have a say in primaries. That's a huge percentage of our voting population that just isn't getting a voice. So structurally, there's a lot wrong with what's happening in Oklahoma. We're limiting people's voice. We are limiting access. You guys saw like 2-hour waits at early voting, 2-hour long lines. And that's because out of all of the states in the nation, the average is like 20 days of early voting. We had 4. So it's just like structurally, we're not creating an environment for people to participate in democracy in a way that's easy and accessible and that values like all perspectives. It's really overvaluing really one single majority, one party, and that sends the message to a lot of people who think differently than maybe the majority that it just isn't even worth trying, it isn't even worth fighting for, and it can't change. Yeah. And I think my hope and point is an example in Tulsa is that it can be different. And not to speak in a partisan way, because I just want it to be true that no matter what you believe or who you are, you have the pathway to like voice your opinions and your vote. And I think what we saw in Tulsa is if people believe their votes matter, which we saw it did in the August election with the mayor's race, it was decided by almost 200 votes. Like who got to go to that final election in November, it was decided by 200 votes. And it's also a nonpartisan race, which allowed anyone to vote. And it resulted in the highest turnout for a mayor's race in Tulsa's history. So I think the message was that your voice in this mayor's race matters, and people felt that way. And you can't feel that way with closed primaries and other structural issues that just exist that need to change. And wow. I guess one last note on that I'll say is like just yesterday, a new state question was initiated, vote yes on 835, which would actually change the law to create open primaries in Oklahoma. So there's a chance, for us to all get involved and like fix the structural issue that's holding us back from having a more multicultural, like more representative democracy in Oklahoma that does exist here.
You just said a whole lot. And the last part where you talked about, I think that's the key, because like a lot of it is self-suppression, right? Like we don't believe our vote's going to matter anyway. I've talked to so many people who think that there's no point of being in this process, not even just the fact that they think everyone's corrupt, but the fact that they think that their impact won't change anything, and that one vote doesn't matter. Even though, like you just explained, these elections are very close. And so it sounds like what you're saying, which is a real shocker, is that when you open up the opportunities for a level playing field, Oklahoma is a little bit more complex than just, a red state.
Definitely. And I think the other reason we have such a potential for like national implications, I think, are the fact that we have tribal land, the McGirt ruling, the fact that we have the race massacre, as part of our state's history, our nation's history. We have active living survivors fighting for reparations and recognition federally. Like, whatever we do here, for good or for bad, has national implications. So I think we could see that in, progressive movements like reparations, but we can also see that in sort of these radical movements that, like Ryan Walters is leading, the fight for Bibles in the classroom. When you think about the January 6th insurrection, as an example, there were even maps that tied like phone activity and data to that day. And a lot of it pointed to Oklahoma. So like when we think about our democracy on a national level, if we let radical ideology kind of flourish here through our state bills, through the way we do our public education, through any of it, like it has national implications for better or for worse. And so I would just love people to, even if we will never be a like this sort of battleground state, like maybe we're never going to be that, but like, can we kind of help have a more representative democracy that protects our whole nation and maybe even leads to some progressive, movements like indigenous rights, Black rights, reparations. Like, if we can prove that here, we can be an example nationally. And so I'd rather us be the bright spot like we were on election night than some of these more like challenging news stories that come out about our state, especially right now.
It sounds like you're making a case that, these dollars should be flowing in proactively, right? If this is ground zero for everything we don't want to see our country become, why not pour in investment to turn this around so that we can then in turn impact nationally?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And it takes time. Like, I think so often we focus on state questions in Oklahoma because that is our only like pathway to maybe passing something more progressive. But what that doesn't help us do is like build a sustained movement that's well resourced. And I think what led to Tulsa's win was really 8 years of a movement that was built, and was really even with Greg's campaign. Like, we would not have
Greg Robinson,
yeah, who ran for mayor and, in a 2-month campaign got over 30% of the vote, almost toppled sort of a dynasty and a long-term family name. And when we saw that as a community, like, that just was a bridge to belief of what we could do that led to, I think, this sort of, belief that someone like Monroe Nichols had a chance. And I've even heard people say, like, they really still didn't believe he had a chance, but there was enough of us that did believe it and poured into a movement at the doors, in one-on-one conversations, on phone calls, that led to that. But I would say this has been 8 years, building of a movement, and that's in Tulsa. But we need that on a statewide level.
Right.
We need a well-resourced, sustainable movement infrastructure that isn't just ballot to ballot measure, but is like a sustained movement that really incorporates people's voice at the center of what Oklahomans want and what the pulse is on just everyday Oklahomans, what we want for our families.
Well, I mean, but I think Tulsa is an important, example for how to build that infrastructure because, I mean, when you look at the data, Nichols won some counties that Trump won by like 66%, and like he made inroads in deep South Tulsa, that a lot of people wouldn't even would take time to even really canvass, right? But, the organizers, believed. And it sounds like what you're saying is when you focus on these small wins, it builds this system of belief that can get you to the next win.
Yeah.
And the next win until that blows up into statewide change, national change.
Yeah, and I think what he did so well that resonated was talk about the issues. Like, when you talk about homelessness, when you talk about public education, I mean, I've knocked so many doors in the city. I've knocked north, south. Like, I've knocked this whole city, I feel like, personally and professionally. And people care about their schools improving. They care about their street lights. They care about stray dogs getting off the street. They care about how to handle a mental health crisis that their family member is having and not wanting them to get harmed in the process. They want parks and opportunities for their kids. Like, it's all very, like, human and connected human experiences that we have. But too often, because our system in Oklahoma is so lopsided, our the messages statewide and the political conversations are so removed, I feel like, from what the day-to-day realities are of people. And instead, we're talking about Bibles in a classroom, which, like, we could talk about that. But honestly, what people want to talk about is, like, can my kid read? Like, let's talk about our kids reading more than talking about specifically having a Bible in the classroom. Like, teachers are talking about getting basic supplies in a classroom. So I feel like that rhetoric is actually really, really, really far removed and not what people are talking about at the doors. And Monroe, I feel like, tapped into that and stayed consistent in every room he was in, which I think helped build trust and belief that he wasn't just talking to one group and saying one thing and saying something to another. And I think people really, I mean, that's maybe in part of why Trump wins, is that he, he's not what a conventional politician is saying or doing.
He says what's on his mind.
He says what's on his mind, but he's also, I think, tapping into something that, I don't know. I still am trying to explore what that is, that like he's tapping into something that apparently a lot of Americans feel and believe and like are experiencing. So for better or for worse, I think that is the key to a candidate winning, is really being tapped into what people are experiencing in the day-to-day, even if it is just basic issues like the economy.
Well, I'll leave.
Let's pause for a second. He didn't do a bathroom.
I have one more point I want to make whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
Should we wait till he comes back? We want to pause it until he comes back?
Sure.
Okay. You were killing it. So what you just said brings me to my last point I really want you to talk about, because a lot of times when you get lost in the sauce of politics, you lose the heart of the issue, right? Mm-hmm. And so like we had 2 Democrats actually that were, in the final race for Tulsa mayor. And so I think that helped a little bit to get people outside of the politics and into what are they actually saying? How is it really going to impact me? Because all the issues that Monroe brought up, homelessness, public safety, education, I mean, they're not, do progressives hold a monopoly on supporting those issues? Or are they just common sense kitchen table issues that families in North Tulsa, West Tulsa, South Tulsa, and East Tulsa all care about?
Yeah, definitely. I think, no, not one party does not have a monopoly on like making sure our kids, are cared for and like our community is working for everybody. So I think that is what resonated. And I also think we have to admit that like there were 2 candidates running, and unfortunately, like Karen Keith's campaign was not clear. I mean, oftentimes when they were asked about the same issue, you had, one candidate with a very clear laid out plan that was transparent on his website, had been since the beginning of his campaign. Again, it didn't change in any room he was in. And then you had, a candidate that couldn't really have that kind of cohesive vision and bold idea and plan for Tulsa. And so that definitely, I think, didn't resonate with people. It was a lot about relationships she had and how that was going to fix the issue. And again, I think people are tired of sort of, status quo politicians. Mm-hmm. People want somebody who's maybe not, kind of the normal insider that people are used to seeing in politics these days. And so I think in some ways, what I heard from people who were Republicans that voted for Monroe was that he wasn't status quo. He wasn't an insider. He wasn't a part of the existing sort of institutions. And so he could come from a different perspective. So I think it just seems like that's what people want in this moment.
And that's crazy because like we're talking about hardcore Trump supporters, some of these Republicans in Oklahoma, right? Like no other state besides Oklahoma has given Trump that much support. Mm-hmm. And so for someone like that kind of voter to put their trust in a black male Democrat who is from a demographic that has never been elected to mayor in Tulsa, I think that shows that what you're saying is true. It is possible to break that barrier, that political barrier, when you really are authentic, when you speak to the heart of the most basic human issues that everyone cares about. Mm-hmm. But I gotta say, you are being way too nice to Karen Keith, okay? Because she ran a horrible campaign. And maybe if she didn't blow off black radio stations and black media in this city, she could have got a few more votes.
Yeah, for sure.
But, I just had to throw that out there.
No, yeah. I mean, he didn't even miss like an event, a questionnaire. Like a lot of times he was the only one that showed up and, accepted an invitation or answered a questionnaire about animal rights. Like I saw him go to every corner of this city. And I think that also resonates. I mean, I think that's unique. Even the night of the election, he stayed and shook hands and gave hugs and did not leave. He was the last one to go because he knew he didn't make it down the finish line alone. Right. And that I think is important too. It was like it really was a campaign of the people, and I think we're going to be holding him accountable through his tenure in the administration to make sure that it stays that way,
Right.
because that's the only way we're going to fix these issues, is coming together as a community, not relying on a single person or an elected official to save us. Like, it's not about a single person, it's about us as a community using our voice, holding those people accountable, and bringing the day-to-day issues from our families door to door to like city hall or state legislature. So we're going to do that regardless, whether or not we're funded, whether or not, you know, anyone supports us to do it. We're going to be doing that for sure.
Sheyda Brown, Deputy Director of the Terence Crutcher Foundation, thank you so much for joining us on In Depth with Deon.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. You're the best.
Appreciate it. This week's Greenwood Changemaker is Amani Myers, a Black queer author, entrepreneur, Tulsa Remote participant. And she's making waves by really tapping into the community and showing people how you can break in authentically. Check it out.
There has to be room for jealousy. There has to be room for anger. There has to be room for sadness, because when you think about even just beyond Tulsa Remote, when you think about the race massacre, and you think about all of the negative things that came with that, people have not been able to grieve. People have just had to move on and hustle and figure it out. And there hasn't been a safe space for people to grieve. And the Tulsa race massacre and the Black Wall Street and just the pain of just Tulsa in general of being overlooked. You see it all the time. There has to be room for that. And there has to be space for us to listen and for us to hear. And then for the same, for us to share as well. Because I think part of why I've been accepted, it has been because not only just because I've shown up, but because of my story. You know, like for me, I want people to know that as somebody that grew up in the foster care system, you're constantly looking for a place to call home. You're constantly looking for community. You're constantly looking for a space to really feel safe. And then also when you're queer, you're gay, you know what I'm saying? And then you're a woman, that adds all of those other complexities to it. And so it's not just enough for us to see Black people. We have to also know Black and brown people, Native, you know what I'm saying? Like, we have to all understand that our struggle is intertwined and that we're really fighting the same thing. Like the same feelings that local and Native Tulsa people are having is some of the same feelings that us as Black Tulsa remoters are having. Like when we get here, we're like, what is going on? Like we've even had our own frustrations and our own anger with Tulsa Remote, and really having to talk with them about like what's going on. Like, but the thing about it is that if you have no awareness or little awareness and you think you're doing the right thing, but you don't really understand how when you bring Black people and brown people from another place and you're putting them here, and it appears that we're taking the resources, that causes further dissension, that causes further segregation. It doesn't it doesn't bring togetherness. And I think that we all have to see and we all have to understand that there is a bigger picture. You know, so how can we reinvest our resources? How can we reinvest our time? You know, because me coming from California, it was hella expensive. I could barely afford to live in California. My sister could not afford to live in California. She was living in her car in California. And I brought her to my space in Sacramento. And I said to her, come to Tulsa because Tulsa would be a space where you can at least breathe, where you can at least thrive. And it has been a place where you can build and you can start fresh and you can start over. And so many of us that have grown up in cities where it's just on the go,
Yeah.
being here is sort of like a breath of fresh air. And for a lot of us that come here, my first thing is like, where are the Black people at? I want to be where the Black people are at. I want to be where the brown people are at. Where are they? And when you come and you don't see it and you don't find it, it can feel really isolating. And I think there's a lot of people that are even in Tulsa remote that are Black and that are brown that have been really isolated, but nobody really talks about it, you know?
I see. I see.
Thank you, Amani, for sharing your story with us. It's so impactful. This week for Community Voices, I turned to TikTok to learn what Oklahoma voters are thinking about the election for president and Tulsa mayor.
During Tuesday night's election, Oklahoma, once again, had the lowest voter turnout in the nation.
Guys, Tulsa just elected the first Black mayor since the massacre. Monroe Nichols defeats Karen Keith in race for mayor of Tulsa, Oklahoma's second largest city. Now, even if I'm a little iffy on whether or not my vote was counted for my county because we had more things to vote on, the only other thing on the Tulsa ballot for Tulsa County, from what I can see, the only election results in for Tulsa County was mayor and president. But this news makes me think that maybe the Black vote might matter here.
Tulsa, Oklahoma just elected their first Black mayor. It is major news for us. If you are not aware of the background with Tulsa, Oklahoma, we are the location for the Tulsa Race Massacre, or the Black Wall Street Massacre that happened back in 1921. So this is the new mayor, Mayor Nichols. He is going to be amazing for our community. He is looking to reduce homelessness, increase public safety, increase affordable public housing, and just a whole bunch of really what Tulsa needs right now. Also, representation is important. This is something we have not had in our community, and we are a large part of the demographic. So welcome, Mayor Nichols. We're excited to have you here. Cannot wait to see what you do.
Let us know how this episode resonated with you. Subscribe. Follow us anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on video, make sure you comment down in the comment section what you thought of the video, what you thought of our guests and our conversation, maybe what you'd like to hear us talk about next week. Special thanks to our producer, Jesse Ulrich, for making this episode possible. I'm Deon Osborne. This is In Depth with Deon. See you next week.